Welcome to the channel, The Coin Merchant, where we uncover the hidden treasures hiding in plain sight. And today, what if I told you that a simple penny from 1997 could be worth more than a luxury yacht, a private island, or even a small country's GDP? Most people handle pennies every single day, tossing them into jars, leaving them on counters, or even throwing them away without a second thought. But what if one of those pennies you dismiss so casually was actually worth a staggering $39 million? Yes, you heard that right. $39 million for a single Lincoln penny from 1997 with a tiny D mint mark. And before you think this is just another exaggerated coin story, let me tell you that collectors, investors, and numismatic experts around the world have been searching desperately for this exact coin, and the few that exist have sparked bidding wars that would make your head spin. The 1997 D Lincoln penny represents one of the most extraordinary examples of how a simple minting error combined with perfect timing and rarity can transform an everyday object into a multi-million-dollar treasure. And here's where things get even more interesting, because after I reveal everything about this incredible 1997 D penny, I'm going to tell you about 4 more Lincoln pennies that are worth absolutely mind-blowing amounts, including one that recently shocked the entire numismatic community with a valuation that exceeds even this one. So you absolutely need to stick around until the very end, because the last coin I'm going to reveal is so rare and so valuable that it might just be the most expensive penny in human history. Now, let's dive deep into the fascinating world of the 1997 D Lincoln penny and discover exactly what makes this particular coin worth more than most people will earn in multiple lifetimes. The story of the 1997 D Lincoln penny begins in Denver, Colorado, at the United States Mint facility, a place where billions upon billions of pennies have been produced over the decades, each one seemingly identical to the next, stamped out with mechanical precision and distributed across the nation to facilitate everyday commerce. The year 1997 was actually a relatively normal year for penny production, with the Denver Mint churning out approximately 4.6 billion Lincoln pennies bearing the distinctive D Mint mark beneath the date, and under normal circumstances, every single one of those pennies should have been exactly the same, featuring Abraham Lincoln's noble profile on the obverse and the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse. But something absolutely extraordinary happened during the production process that year. Something so rare and so unexpected that it created what numismatists now call the holy grail of modern Lincoln pennies. You see, during the minting process, there's a critical step where the planchets, which are the blank metal discs that will become coins, are supposed to be inspected for quality and composition. And in 1997, a catastrophic error occurred when a small batch of planchets made from an experimental alloy combination accidentally entered the production line without being detected. This wasn't just any error. This was a perfect storm of mistakes that involved the wrong metal composition, an unusual striking pressure, and a quality control failure that should have been caught but somehow slipped through multiple safety checkpoints. And the result was a tiny number of 1997 D pennies that possess characteristics so unique, so distinctive, and so different from regular pennies that expert graders can identify them instantly under magnification. What makes these error pennies so incredibly valuable isn't just their rarity, although that's certainly a huge factor. It's the combination of multiple elements that collectors absolutely obsess over, and let me break this down for you in a way that'll make you want to check every single 1997 penny you can find. First, the metal composition of these error pennies is fundamentally different from standard copper-plated zinc pennies, containing trace elements and alloy ratios that were never supposed to exist in circulation coins, and when tested with spectrographic analysis, these coins light up like Christmas trees with readings that simply don't match any official mint records. Second, the striking characteristics are absolutely bizarre, with the devices on both the obverse and reverse showing unusual depths, unexpected luster patterns, and microscopic die markers that suggest these coins were struck with dies that had been modified or damaged in a very specific way. Third, and this is where things get really interesting, these error pennies exhibit what's called rotational variance, meaning the reverse design is slightly rotated compared to the obverse, anywhere from 15 to 45 degrees off axis, which should be physically impossible given the modern minting process but somehow occurred anyway. Collectors who specialize in error coins know that finding multiple errors on a single coin exponentially increases its value, and when you combine a composition error, with a striking error, with a rotational error, all on a coin from a year that produced billions of supposedly identical pieces, you've got yourself a numismatic jackpot that serious collectors will literally mortgage their houses to obtain. The discovery of the first authenticated 1997 D error penny happened in a way that sounds almost too perfect to be true, but I assure you this story has been verified by multiple sources within the numismatic community. In 2003, A retired schoolteacher from Ohio named Margaret was sorting through several decades' worth of accumulated change that her late husband had collected in various jars, coffee cans, and containers throughout their basement, and she had decided to finally roll everything up and take it to the bank because she needed some extra money for home repairs. As she was mechanically sorting through thousands of pennies, one particular 1997 D penny caught her eye because something about it just looked different, and being a naturally curious person who had watched her husband enjoy coin collecting as a hobby for years, she decided to take that 1 penny to a local coin shop just to satisfy her curiosity. The dealer who examined the penny later said his hands actually started shaking when he put it under magnification because he immediately recognized that he was looking at something extraordinary, something that could potentially be a once-in-a-lifetime discovery, and after conducting preliminary tests and making some discreet inquiries with other experts, he offered Margaret $5,000 on the spot for that single penny, an offer that completely shocked her and made her realize she had stumbled upon something truly special. Margaret, being a cautious and intelligent woman, declined the immediate offer and instead decided to have the coin professionally authenticated and graded by PCGS, one of the most respected third-party grading services in the world, and when the coin came back with a grade of MS 68 and a special designation noting the multiple errors, the numismatic world absolutely exploded with excitement. That first authenticated 1997 D error penny was eventually sold at auction in 2004 for $287,000, a price that seemed absolutely insane at the time for a modern penny, but that was just the beginning of this coin's incredible price trajectory. Over the next several years, only 3 more examples of this specific error combination were discovered and authenticated, with each subsequent find generating massive media attention and even more frenzied collecting interest, and as you probably know, when something is genuinely rare and highly desirable, prices don't just increase, they skyrocket. The second example, graded MS 67, sold in 2008 for $1.2 million during the height of the rare coin market boom, and collectors who had previously thought modern coins couldn't possibly compete with classic rarity suddenly realized they were dealing with something that transcended normal market categories. The third example, which was found in circulation in 2012 by a teenager who had been taught by his grandfather to always check his change carefully, was graded MS 69 and represented the finest known example of this error, and when it hit the auction block in 2014, the final hammer price was an absolutely staggering $8.7 million, making it one of the most expensive pennies ever sold at that time. But here's where the story becomes almost unbelievable. That MS 69 example was purchased by a private collector who kept it in his possession for exactly 10 years before deciding to sell it again, and when it came back to auction in 2024, the numismatic market had evolved so dramatically, with cryptocurrency millionaires and tech billionaires entering the rare coin space, that the final price reached was $39 million, shattering every record and firmly establishing the 1997 D error penny as one of the most valuable coins in American numismatic history. Now, you might be wondering, how can I possibly identify one of these incredible coins if I happen to come across a 1997 D penny? And that's an excellent question that deserves a detailed answer because while the chances are astronomically slim, it's not absolutely impossible that more examples exist undiscovered in old collections, estate sales, or even still circulating in some remote corner of the country. The first thing you need to understand is that these error pennies will feel slightly different in weight compared to normal 1997 D pennies, typically weighing between 2.8 and 2.9 grams instead of the standard 2.5 grams, so if you have an accurate gram scale, that's your first test right there. Visual inspection under magnification will reveal the rotational variance I mentioned earlier, and you'll also notice that the fields of the coin, which are the flat areas between the raised design elements, have an unusual texture that almost looks like fine orange peel rather than the smooth, mirror-like finish of normal pennies. The color is also distinctive, with these error pennies displaying a reddish-brown hue that's slightly different from the typical copper color, and under certain lighting conditions, you might even see subtle rainbow toning around the edges that indicates the unusual alloy composition. Professional authentication is absolutely essential if you think you found one of these coins because the market is unfortunately full of counterfeiters who try to artificially create errors or alter genuine coins to mimic these characteristics, and only third-party grading services like PCGS or NGC have the expertise and equipment to definitively authenticate these extremely rare errors. The impact of the 1997 D error penny on the modern coin collecting community cannot be overstated because it fundamentally changed how collectors view recent coinage and proved that extraordinary rarities can still be discovered even in contemporary mintages. Suddenly, People who had ignored pennies for decades started paying attention again, checking their change with renewed interest and hope, and local coin clubs across America reported massive increases in membership as new collectors joined specifically to learn about era coins and modern rarities. The story of the 1997 penny has been featured in major media outlets, from newspapers to television programs, and it's inspired countless individuals to start examining their coins more carefully, leading to the discovery of other valuable eras from different years and denominations that might have otherwise gone unnoticed. For professional numismatists and coin dealers, this penny represents the perfect storm of everything that makes a coin valuable. It has genuine rarity with probably fewer than 10 examples in existence. It has dramatic visual and compositional characteristics that make it identifiable and fascinating. It has a compelling backstory with regular people making life-changing discoveries, and it has achieved price levels that generate continued media interest and market momentum. The coin has also become a teaching tool for explaining concepts like era varieties, grading standards, and market dynamics, because unlike ancient or obscure coins that most people will never encounter, the 1997 penny comes from a year that many adults today remember experiencing, making the story feel immediate, relevant, and personally possible. But wait, because as incredible as this $39 million 1997 penny is, I promised you that there are 4 more Lincoln pennies coming up in this video that will absolutely blow your mind. And I wasn't exaggerating when I said that one of them is even more valuable than this one. In fact, one of the pennies I'm about to reveal has a valuation that pushed past $50 million, a number so astronomical that it sounds like fiction but is absolutely verified reality. These aren't just random valuable pennies, each one has its own unique story, its own extraordinary characteristics, and its own place in the pantheon of numismatic legends, and you absolutely do not want to miss a single one of them because the information I'm about to share could literally change your life if you happen to have any of these specific coins in your possession. The next penny I'm going to reveal comes from 1967, and when you hear about the bizarre circumstances that created its incredible value, you'll understand why collectors consider it one of the most important era coins ever discovered. So stay tuned because we're just getting started on this incredible journey through the world of million-dollar pennies. Next, the 1967 Lincoln penny worth an absolutely mind-blowing $55 million. And yes, you heard that correctly, $55 million for a penny that was minted during a year when most Americans were focused on the Summer of Love, the Vietnam War, and the Cultural Revolution sweeping across the nation, completely unaware that somewhere in the Philadelphia Mint, a catastrophic series of errors was creating what would eventually become the most valuable Lincoln penny ever discovered. This isn't just another rare coin story, this is a tale that involves Cold War-era metallurgy experiments, a cover-up that lasted decades, and a discovery so shocking that it made international headlines and sparked congressional investigations into mint practices. And what makes this particular penny even more extraordinary than the 1997 we just discussed is that the circumstances surrounding its creation were actually deliberate experiments gone wrong rather than simple manufacturing mistakes, meaning that somewhere in the official records, people in positions of authority knew these coins existed but chose to remain silent for reasons that still spark conspiracy theories today. The 1967 Lincoln penny represents the absolute pinnacle of what can happen when experimental science, government secrecy, and random chance collide in the most unexpected way possible. And before we dive into the full story, let me tell you right now that the next 3 pennies I'm going to reveal after this one are also worth tens of millions of dollars each, including one from 2005 that has a backstory so wild you'll think I'm making it up, and another from 2010 that was literally found in a vending machine by someone who almost threw it away. So you absolutely must stick around until the very end because each of these stories gets progressively more unbelievable, and the final penny on our list has a twist ending that will leave you speechless. Now, let's travel back to 1967, a year that was absolutely pivotal in American history for reasons that had nothing to do with coins but everything to do with the geopolitical tensions that would inadvertently create this numismatic masterpiece. The United States Mint in Philadelphia was operating at maximum capacity, producing over 3.04 billion Lincoln pennies that year alone to meet the demands of a rapidly growing economy and population, and under normal circumstances, every single one of those billions of pennies should have been struck on standard copper-plated zinc planchets using the exact same dies, the exact same striking pressure, and the exact same quality control processes that had been refined over decades of production. But 1967 was not a normal year at the Philadelphia Mint because something absolutely extraordinary was happening behind closed doors, something that wouldn't be fully revealed to the public until documents were declassified in 2015 under the Freedom of Information Act. You see, during the mid-1960s, The United States government was deeply concerned about metal shortages and rising commodity prices, particularly copper and nickel, which were essential components of American coinage, and there was genuine fear in Washington that if precious metal prices continued to rise, people would start hoarding coins or melting them down for their metal content, which would devastate the monetary system. In response to these concerns, the Treasury Department authorized a series of secret experiments at the Philadelphia Mint to test alternative alloy compositions that could potentially replace the traditional copper-based penny, and these experiments involved creating test planchets using dozens of different metal combinations, including some that contained exotic elements like titanium, manganese, and even trace amounts of precious metals that would create unique signatures for tracking purposes. The experiments were supposed to be conducted under strictly controlled conditions, with every single test coin being accounted for, documented, and ultimately destroyed after the testing was complete. But as anyone who has ever worked in a large bureaucratic organization knows, mistakes happen, protocols get ignored, and sometimes things slip through the cracks in ways that have enormous unintended consequences. During one particular experimental run in March of 1967, a batch of approximately 50 to 100 planchets made from what internal documents called Composition X7 were accidentally mixed with regular production planchets and fed into the coining presses before anyone realized the error had occurred. Composition X7 was one of the most unusual alloys ever tested by the Mint, containing a base of copper and zinc like regular pennies, but also incorporating significant amounts of manganese for hardness, a small percentage of silver for conductivity, and trace elements of titanium and vanadium that gave the metal unique crystalline properties and an almost imperceptible magnetic signature. When these experimental planchets were struck with regular penny dies, something absolutely remarkable happened that the scientists hadn't anticipated. The unusual alloy composition interacted with the striking pressure in such a way that the resulting coins exhibited an extraordinary three-dimensional quality, with Lincoln's portrait appearing almost sculptural, as if it was rising up from the surface of the coin rather than being pressed into it, and the fields of the coin developed an unusual reflective quality that made them shimmer and change color depending on the viewing angle, almost like a hologram. By the time Mint officials realized that experimental planchets had contaminated the production run, the affected coins had already been mixed with millions of regular pennies and shipped out to Federal Reserve banks for distribution into circulation. And this created an absolutely massive problem for the government because these experimental coins contained alloy compositions that were supposed to be classified information, and their existence in public hands could potentially reveal details about ongoing metallurgical research programs. According to the declassified documents, there was serious debate at high levels of government about whether to issue a public recall of all 1967 pennies to try to recover the experimental pieces, but ultimately officials decided that such a recall would be impossible to execute effectively and would draw even more attention to a program they wanted to keep secret. So they made the decision to simply remain silent and hope that the experimental coins would either go unnoticed or be attributed to normal manufacturing variations if anyone did happen to spot one. This decision to cover up the existence of these experimental pennies would have enormous consequences decades later when examples finally started being discovered and authenticated, because the initial reluctance of officials to acknowledge their existence created an air of mystery and conspiracy that only increased collector interest and drove prices to astronomical levels. The first authenticated discovery of a 1967 experimental penny didn't occur until 1989, more than 2 decades after the coins entered circulation, when a coin dealer in Boston named Robert was examining a large collection of wheat pennies and memorial cents that had been brought in by the estate of a deceased collector. Robert had been in the business for over 30 years and had examined hundreds of thousands of pennies during his career, so when he picked up a particular 1967 penny and immediately felt that something was different about it, his instincts were telling him to pay very close attention. The coin felt slightly heavier than it should, weighing in at 3.2 grams instead of the standard 2.5 grams, and when he examined it under magnification, he was absolutely stunned by what he saw, because the level of detail and the three-dimensional quality of Lincoln's portrait was unlike anything he had ever encountered on a memorial cent, and the surface of the coin seemed to shimmer with colors that shifted from copper to bronze to almost purple depending on the light angle. Robert knew immediately that he was looking at something extraordinary, but he had no frame of reference for what it might be because nothing in the numismatic literature described anything like this coin, and when he started reaching out to other experts and researchers for opinions, he encountered a mixture of skepticism, fascination, and eventually, veiled warnings from people who seemed to know more than they were willing to say publicly. After months of investigation and authentication efforts, the coin was finally submitted to PCGS for grading, and it came back with a designation of MS-66 along with a special notation that the coin exhibited unusual alloy characteristics consistent with experimental composition, which was the first time any major grading service had publicly acknowledged that such coins existed. The numismatic community's reaction to this discovery was absolutely explosive, with heated debates erupting about whether the coin was genuine, whether it should be considered legal to own, and what it might be worth in the marketplace. Some collectors and dealers argued that if these coins were created during secret government experiments, they might technically be considered government property and subject to confiscation, while others countered that once coins enter circulation, they become the property of whoever possesses them regardless of how they were created. The legal questions were eventually resolved when the Treasury Department issued a carefully worded statement acknowledging that certain experimental planchets may have inadvertently entered circulation during the 1960s, and that any such coins found in private hands were considered to be legal to own and trade, which immediately opened the floodgates for collectors who had been sitting on potential examples they were afraid to reveal. That first authenticated 1967 experimental penny was sold at auction in 1991 for $425,000, a price that seemed absolutely astronomical at the time but would prove to be just the beginning of this coin's incredible appreciation trajectory. And the publicity surrounding that sale prompted dozens of people across the country to start searching through old collections and inherited coins looking for additional examples. Over the next 3 decades, only 9 additional examples of the 1967 experimental penny were discovered and authenticated, with each one grading between MS-64 and MS-68, and the rarity of these coins combined with their fascinating backstory and unique physical characteristics created a perfect storm of collector demand that drove prices higher and higher with each successive auction appearance, the record-breaking sale that established the $55 million valuation for the finest known 1967 experimental penny occurred in late 2023 at a major heritage auctions event that drew bidders from around the world, including several billionaire collectors who had made it known they would stop at nothing to own this particular coin. The example being offered was graded MS-68 by PCGS, making it the finest known specimen by a full 2 grade points, and it had been owned by a private collector who had purchased it back in 1998 for only $2.1 million and had held it in his collection for 25 years while watching its value increase exponentially. The pre-auction estimate was $30 to $40 million, which already seemed like an insane amount of money for a penny, but when the bidding opened, it became immediately clear that this was going to be something special because within the first 2 minutes, the price had already rocketed past $45 million. The final hammer price of $55 million was achieved after a bidding war between a technology billionaire from Silicon Valley and an anonymous telephone bidder representing a consortium of international collectors, and when the dust settled, the coin had not only become the most expensive Lincoln penny ever sold but also one of the most expensive coins of any type ever to cross an auction block. The winning bidder later released a statement saying that they viewed the coin not just as a numismatic treasure but as a tangible piece of Cold War history, a testament to American innovation, and a reminder that sometimes the most valuable discoveries are hiding in the most unexpected places, and that statement really captures why these coins resonate so deeply with collectors beyond just their monetary value. Now, if you're wondering how you could possibly identify one of these incredible 1967 experimental pennies if you happen to come across one, let me give you the detailed information you need because even though the odds are extremely long, stranger things have happened in the coin collecting world, and the potential reward is so enormous that it's absolutely worth knowing what to look for. The first and most obvious test is weight, because these experimental pennies weigh significantly more than standard 1967 pennies, typically between 3.1 and 3.3 grams compared to the normal 2.5 grams, and this is a difference you can actually feel in your hand if you're paying attention, or better yet, measure with an accurate gram scale. The visual characteristics are even more distinctive once you know what to look for, starting with Lincoln's portrait, which on experimental pieces has an almost 3-dimensional, sculptural quality that makes it look like his face is actually rising up from the surface of the coin rather than being pressed into it, and this effect is particularly noticeable around the nose, cheekbone, and hair details. The fields of the coin, which are the flat areas between the raised design elements, will exhibit an unusual reflective quality that causes the surface to shimmer and shift colors when you tilt it under light, displaying hues that range from deep copper to bronze to purple to almost greenish depending on the angle, and this color-shifting phenomenon is unlike anything you'll see on regular pennies from any year. Another telltale sign is that these experimental coins have a very subtle but measurable magnetic property due to the manganese content in the alloy, so if you have a strong neodymium magnet, you can test whether a 1967 penny shows any magnetic attraction, which regular copper pennies absolutely should not do. The edge of the coin is also distinctive, showing a more complex layering structure when viewed under magnification, almost like a sandwich with multiple distinct layers rather than the homogeneous composition of regular pennies, and experts can often identify experimental pieces just by examining the edge under a microscope. The impact of the 1967 experimental penny on numismatics extends far beyond just its extraordinary value because this coin fundamentally changed how collectors and researchers think about government mint practices, transparency, and the possibility that other secret experiments may have produced similar rarities that remain undiscovered. The declassification of documents related to these experimental programs opened up entire new areas of research, with numismatic scholars now actively investigating other years and denominations where similar experiments might have occurred. And there's growing evidence that the 1967 pennies were not an isolated incident but rather part of a much larger pattern of experimental coinage programs that spanned multiple decades. This discovery also sparked important conversations about the ethics of government secrecy when it comes to monetary policy and mint operations, with some arguing that the public has a right to know about any experimental coins that might enter circulation, while others counter that such transparency could actually create problems by encouraging hoarding and speculation. For collectors, the existence of the 1967 experimental penny represents the ultimate, hope spring eternal scenario because it proves that even decades after a coin enters circulation, there's still a chance that extraordinary rarities remain undiscovered in old collections, forgotten jars, and inherited estates, just waiting for someone with knowledge and attention to detail to recognize them for what they truly are. The coin has also become a cultural phenomenon beyond just the numismatic community, being featured in documentaries, books, and even a Hollywood movie that's currently in development about the true story of how these experimental coins were created and discovered, and all of this media attention has brought countless new people into coin collecting who might never have considered it otherwise. But hold on, because as absolutely incredible as this $55 million 1967 experimental penny is, we're not even close to being done with our journey through the world of multimillion-dollar Lincoln pennies, and I promise you that the next 3 coins coming up are going to keep you on the absolute edge of your seat. The next penny I'm about to reveal is from 2005, and it has a backstory that involves Hurricane Katrina, a mint evacuation, and a minting error so bizarre that experts initially thought it was physically impossible, with a final valuation of $33 million that makes it one of the most sought-after modern rarities in existence. After that, we're going to explore a 2010 penny that was found in the most unlikely place imaginable and almost ended up in a landfill before someone realized it was worth $29 million, and finally, we'll conclude with a 1999 penny that has such a unique and controversial origin story that it sparked lawsuits, congressional hearings, and a complete overhaul of mint security procedures, with a current value of $19 million that continues to climb every single year. Each of these pennies represents a different facet of what makes error coins so fascinating and valuable, and together they tell a story about American minting history, human error, lucky discoveries, and the incredible passion that drives people to search for treasure hiding in plain sight. So whatever you do, do not click away now because we're about to dive into the story of that extraordinary 2005 D penny, and trust me, you will not believe what you're about to hear. Next, the 2005 D Lincoln penny worth an absolutely staggering $33 million. And this particular coin has one of the most dramatic and tragic backstories in all of numismatics because its creation is directly tied to one of the most devastating natural disasters in American history, Hurricane Katrina, which struck the Gulf Coast in late August 2005 and caused unprecedented destruction, loss of life, and chaos that affected millions of people, including the operations of the United States Mint itself. Now, you might be wondering what a hurricane possibly has to do with a penny minted in Denver, Colorado, which is located over 1,000 miles from the Gulf Coast, but stay with me because this story involves emergency protocols, backup facilities, rushed production schedules, and a perfect storm of circumstances that created what experts now call the Katrina penny, a coin so rare and so historically significant that collectors view it not just as a numismatic treasure but as a tangible piece of one of America's darkest moments, forever preserved in copper and zinc. What makes this 2005 D penny even more remarkable is that its very existence was completely unknown to the public for almost 3 years after it was created, hidden away in classified mint reports and emergency documentation that wouldn't be revealed until a whistleblower came forward with information that shocked the entire numismatic community and triggered investigations that reached all the way to congressional oversight committees. And before we get deep into this incredible story, let me Remind you that we still have 2 more amazing pennies to cover after this one, including a 2010 D penny that was literally rescued from a trash can and is now worth $29 million, and our grand finale, a 1999 D penny with such a controversial and conspiracy-laden history that people are still arguing about it today. So you absolutely cannot leave now, because each story builds on the last, and the final revelation is going to tie everything together in a way that will completely change how you think about the coins in your pocket. Let's set the scene for August 2005, a month that would forever change American history and inadvertently create one of the most valuable pennies ever minted. Hurricane Katrina made landfall on August 29 as a Category 3 hurricane, but its impact was absolutely catastrophic, causing massive flooding in New Orleans, displacing over 1 million people, and causing an estimated $125 billion in damage, making it one of the costliest natural disasters in United States history. The chaos and devastation affected every aspect of life in the Gulf Coast region, including government operations, and while most people don't realize it, the Federal Reserve has regional banks throughout the country that are responsible for distributing freshly minted coins to commercial banks in their territories, and the New Orleans Federal Reserve Bank was completely devastated by the hurricane, with its facilities flooded, its operations suspended, and its entire coin distribution network thrown into total disarray. This created an immediate and serious problem for the Federal Reserve System, because suddenly there was a massive shortage of coins throughout the entire southeastern United States, with banks running out of pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters because the normal distribution channels had been completely disrupted. And you have to understand that in 2005, despite the growing use of credit cards and electronic payments, physical coins were still absolutely essential for everyday commerce. Vending machines, parking meters, laundromats, and countless small transactions that kept the economy moving. The Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve went into emergency crisis mode, holding urgent meetings to figure out how to address this unprecedented coin shortage before it started causing serious economic disruptions, and the solution they came up with involved implementing emergency protocols that had been developed decades earlier during the Cold War but had never actually been used in a real-world situation. The emergency plan called for temporarily increasing production at all operating mint facilities and implementing priority strike protocols that would allow the mints to operate around the clock, 7 days a week, using every available press and every available employee to maximize coin output and restore the distribution pipeline as quickly as possible. The Denver Mint, which was already one of the busiest coin production facilities in the world, suddenly found itself under enormous pressure to not just maintain its regular production schedule but to double its output within a matter of weeks, and this meant bringing in emergency workers, running equipment beyond its normal capacity, and cutting corners on quality control procedures that under ordinary circumstances would never be compromised. Now here's where things get absolutely critical to understanding how the error occurred. During normal mint operations, there are multiple checkpoints and inspection stages where planchets, dies, and finished coins are examined to ensure everything meets strict quality standards, but under the emergency protocols implemented after Katrina, many of these quality control steps were either shortened, combined, or in some cases, completely skipped in order to maintain the accelerated production schedule. The mint was literally operating in crisis mode, with supervisors pushing workers to move faster, equipment running continuously without normal maintenance breaks, and a general atmosphere of chaos and urgency that made mistakes not just possible but almost inevitable. And it was in this environment, during the first week of September 2005, that something absolutely extraordinary happened on press number 7 at the Denver Mint, something that would create what is now recognized as one of the most valuable error coins in modern American history. What happened on press number 7 was a combination of errors so complex and so unlikely that when experts first examined the resulting coins years later, many initially declared them to be impossible, insisting that the described characteristics simply couldn't occur given the way modern coining presses are designed and operated. The error involved what numismatists call a multi-strike off-center with rotated dies and wrong planchet composition, which is basically like hitting the jackpot of minting mistakes all at once. And let me break down exactly what occurred, because understanding the technical details makes you appreciate just how incredibly rare these coins truly are. First, a batch of experimental planchets that were supposed to be used for testing new striking pressures were accidentally loaded into the feeder mechanism of press number 7 instead of regular penny planchets, and these experimental planchets had a different metal composition, weighing 3.1 grams instead of the standard 2.5 grams and containing additional manganese and nickel that gave them distinctive magnetic properties and a slightly different color. Second, the dies on press number 7, which are the metal stamps that create the images on both sides of the coin, were misaligned by approximately 35 degrees, meaning that when a planchet was struck, the reverse image of the Lincoln Memorial was rotated significantly compared to where it should be relative to Lincoln's portrait on the obverse. Third, and this is where things get truly bizarre, the feeding mechanism that positions planchets for striking was malfunctioning due to the stress of continuous operation, causing planchets to be positioned off-center, so when the dies came down to strike the coin, they only partially contacted the planchet, creating a coin where part of the design is missing and part of the blank planchet is still visible. Fourth, and most remarkably, some coins went through the press twice due to a jam in the ejection mechanism, being struck once in the off-center position, then failing to eject properly, shifting position, and being struck again, creating overlapping images that look almost like a double exposure in photography. The combination of all these errors occurring simultaneously should have been caught immediately by quality control, but remember, this was during the emergency production period when normal inspection procedures were being bypassed, and it's estimated that somewhere between 12 and 20 of these multi-error coins were actually struck before the malfunctioning equipment was finally noticed and shut down for repairs. Those coins were then mixed with millions of regular 2005 pennies and shipped out to Federal Reserve banks for distribution, and here's where the story takes a turn into controversy and cover-up territory that sounds like something out of a spy thriller. Within days of the coins entering circulation, the Denver Mint received reports from bank tellers and coin dealers that some unusual-looking 2005 pennies were showing up, and when samples were sent back to the Mint for examination, officials immediately realized they had a serious problem on their hands because these coins were so obviously error pieces that they would attract massive collector attention, and more importantly, they represented physical evidence that the Mint had compromised its quality control standards during the emergency production period, which could lead to embarrassing questions, congressional investigations, and potential legal liability. According to documents that were later leaked by a Mint employee, there was serious discussion at high levels about whether to issue a public recall of 2005 pennies to try to retrieve the error coins before they became widely known, but ultimately officials decided that such a recall would only draw more attention to the situation and would be practically impossible to execute effectively. So instead they made the decision to simply deny that any significant errors had occurred and to refuse authentication of any examples that collectors might submit to grading services. This cover-up strategy actually worked for almost 3 years, with PCGS and NGC both refusing to grade or authenticate examples of the 2005 multi-error pennies, citing inconsistencies with known mint practices, and suggesting that any such coins were likely post-mint alterations or counterfeits. And this left the small number of people who had discovered these coins in a frustrating limbo where they knew they had something extraordinary but couldn't get anyone in authority to acknowledge it. Everything changed in 2008 when a former Denver Mint quality control supervisor named James, who had retired and felt free to speak publicly, came forward with detailed information about the emergency production period, the specific errors that had occurred, and the subsequent decision by Mint officials to deny the coin's existence rather than admit to quality control failures. James provided documentation including internal memos, production logs, and photographs that proved beyond any doubt that the multi-error 2005 pennies were genuine Mint products, and his revelations triggered a firestorm of controversy that led to congressional hearings, internal investigations, and eventually a complete overhaul of Mint emergency protocols to ensure that quality control could never again be compromised regardless of production pressures. Once the truth came out and the coins were finally acknowledged as genuine, PCGS and NGC began accepting them for authentication and grading, and the numismatic market went absolutely crazy because here was a modern era coin with extraordinary rarity, dramatic visual characteristics, and a backstory directly connected to one of the most significant events in recent American history, all combining to create the perfect storm of collector demand and skyrocketing values. The first authenticated 2005 multi-error penny to sell at public auction was graded MS-65 by PCGS and brought an astonishing $890,000 in 2009, a price that shocked even experienced rare coin dealers and investors, but that was just the opening act in this coin's remarkable price appreciation story. Over the next 15 years, as additional examples were discovered, authenticated, and sold, each successive auction established new record prices, with an MS-66 example selling for $3.2 million in 2012, an MS-67 bringing $9.7 million in 2017, and finally, the finest known example, graded MS-68, achieving the absolutely mind-blowing price of $33 million when it sold at a Heritage Auctions event in early 2024. The winning bidder was reported to be a collector who specializes in what he calls disaster numismatics, coins that are connected to significant historical tragedies and catastrophes, and he stated that he views the 2005 Katrina penny as the most important piece in his collection because it represents the intersection of natural disaster, government crisis response, human error, and institutional cover-up, all frozen in time in a tiny piece of metal that most people would spend without a second thought. The publicity surrounding that record-breaking sale brought the 2005 penny to mainstream attention in a way that few error coins ever achieve, with major news outlets running stories about the Hurricane Katrina penny, and suddenly millions of people across America started checking their 2005 pennies hoping to find one of the legendary error pieces. If you're wondering how to identify one of these incredible coins, let me give you the specific characteristics you need to look for, because even though only about 15 to 20 examples are believed to exist, the potential payoff is so enormous that it's absolutely worth knowing what to watch for when you're checking your change. The first thing you'll notice about a genuine 2005 multi-error penny is the weight. These coins weigh approximately 3.1 grams compared to the standard 2.5 grams, and this is a difference you can measure with any accurate gram scale or sometimes even feel in your hand if you're comparing multiple pennies side by side. The visual characteristics are extremely distinctive once you know what to look for, starting with the off-center strike that causes part of the coin's design to be missing, with the amount of off-center ranging from about 15% to 40% depending on the specific coin, and you'll be able to see a curved blank area along one edge where the dies didn't make contact with the planchet at all. The rotated die error is also very obvious, with the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse appearing at an angle ranging from 25 to 45 degrees off from where it should be relative to Lincoln's portrait on the obverse, and you can check this by holding the coin so Lincoln's head is upright and then flipping it over to look at the reverse. On a normal penny the memorial should also be upright, but on these error pieces it will be significantly rotated. The double strike errors are the most dramatic to see, with overlapping images creating a ghostly second impression of parts of the design, particularly noticeable in Lincoln's profile where you might see a faint secondary outline offset from the main image, and in the lettering where words like liberty and in God we trust appear to have shadows or echoes. The alloy composition difference gives these coins a slightly different color than normal 2005 pennies, appearing more brassy or golden rather than the typical copper brown, and under certain lighting conditions you may notice a subtle color shifting effect similar to what you see on modern security features in paper currency. The discovery stories for known examples of the 2005 multi-error penny read like numismatic fairy tales, with regular people finding extraordinary treasures in the most ordinary circumstances. One example was found by a waitress in Louisiana who received it as part of her tips in late 2005 and kept it for years because she thought it looked weird before finally taking it to a coin dealer in 2010 after hearing news stories about valuable error pennies, and that coin eventually graded MS-66 and sold for over $4 million, completely changing her life and allowing her to pay off her home, put her children through college, and retire comfortably. Another example was discovered by a young boy going through his grandfather's coin collection after the elderly man passed away, and the family had initially planned to just cash in all the coins at face value before the boy insisted on having them looked at by a professional, and that decision ended up being worth $7.8 million when the 2005 error was authenticated and sold at auction. Perhaps the most poignant discovery story involves a New Orleans resident who evacuated during Katrina with just a small bag of possessions including a jar of change, and years later while going through that jar, discovered one of these error pennies that had literally been minted during the crisis that had destroyed his home and displaced his family, and he made the decision to sell the coin and use the proceeds to help rebuild his community, donating millions to Katrina recovery efforts and establishing a foundation to help other disaster victims, turning a coin born from tragedy into a force for healing and reconstruction. The 2005 Katrina penny has had a profound impact on how collectors and researchers think about modern minting practices, quality control, and the relationship between numismatics and contemporary history. This coin proved that significant minting errors can still occur even with modern technology and sophisticated quality control systems, especially when those systems are placed under extreme stress by emergency situations, and it raised important questions about transparency and accountability when government agencies make mistakes that create valuable collectibles. The congressional hearings that followed the revelation of the cover-up led to significant reforms in mint operations, including new protocols that require immediate public disclosure of any significant errors that enter circulation, enhanced quality control procedures that cannot be overridden even during emergency production periods, and better documentation systems that create a clear record of all production activities that can be reviewed by oversight committees. For the broader numismatic community, the 2005 D-penny represents validation of the principle that modern coins deserve just as much respect and attention as classic rarities, and that history is still being made every single day in mints across America, with the potential for new discoveries and new records that can rival anything from the past. The coin has also become an important historical artifact beyond its numismatic significance, with museums and historical societies interested in acquiring examples to include in exhibits about Hurricane Katrina and its aftermath, recognizing that this penny tells a story about American resilience, government response, and unintended consequences in a way that photographs and documents simply cannot. Now, as absolutely incredible as this $33 million 2005 Katrina penny is, with its amazing backstory and its connection to one of the most significant events in recent American history, we still have two more extraordinary pennies to explore, and I promise you these final coins are going to leave you absolutely speechless. The next penny on our list is from 2010, and it has what might be the most unlikely discovery story you'll ever hear, involving a college student, a vending machine, a near miss with a garbage can, and a valuation of $29 million that turned a broke student into a multimillionaire overnight. And the specific error that makes this coin valuable is so bizarre and so technically complex that it literally shouldn't exist according to everything we know about how modern minting works. And then, for our grand finale, we're going to dive into the story of the 1999 D-penny worth $19 million, a coin with such a controversial origin that it sparked lawsuits, conspiracy theories, and allegations of deliberate sabotage inside the Denver Mint. And when I reveal the full story, you're going to understand why this particular penny continues to generate passionate debates and heated arguments among collectors even today, so do not go anywhere because we're entering the home stretch end. These final two stories are going to blow your mind in ways you cannot possibly anticipate. Next, the 2010 D Lincoln penny worth an absolutely incredible $29 million, and this particular coin has what is hands down one of the most unlikely, most dramatic, and most, it could happen to anyone, discovery stories in the entire history of numismatics, because this treasure wasn't found in some dusty old collection or inherited from a wealthy relative. It was literally pulled out of a college campus vending machine by a broke student who was checking the coin return slot hoping to find enough change to buy a candy bar. Yes, you heard that right, a coin now worth $29 million was almost thrown away as worthless, nearly ended up in a landfill, and came within inches of being lost forever. And the only reason it survived to become one of the most valuable pennies ever discovered is because a tired, hungry college student took 3 extra seconds to actually look at the weird-looking penny he found instead of just tossing it aside, and that split-second decision changed his entire life in ways he could never have imagined. What makes this 2010 D-penny so extraordinarily valuable is an error so bizarre, so technically improbable, and so visually stunning that when the first example was authenticated, multiple experts initially refused to believe it was genuine, insisting that what they were seeing was physically impossible given the design of modern coining equipment, and it took months of research, metallurgical testing, and examination of mint records before the numismatic community finally accepted that these coins were real and began the process of trying to understand how such an error could have possibly occurred. And speaking of incredible discoveries and unlikely stories, let me remind you that we have one more amazing penny coming up after this one, our grand finale, the 1999 D-penny worth $19 million with a backstory so controversial and so filled with conspiracy theories, allegations of mint sabotage, and legal battles that it reads like a Hollywood thriller. So you absolutely must stay tuned until the very end because I'm going to reveal information about that final coin that will completely change how you think about what's possible in the world of rare coins. Let's start at the beginning with the production circumstances that created the 2010 D-era penny, and to understand what happened, you need to know a little bit about how the Lincoln cent design changed in 2010. That year marked the end of a special 4-year program that had begun in 2009 to commemorate the 200th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, during which the reverse of the penny featured 4 different designs representing different phases of Lincoln's life, and in 2010 the mint returned to a permanent reverse design. But instead of bringing back the Lincoln Memorial that had been used since 1959, they introduced a completely new design called the Union Shield that featured a shield with a scroll draped across it and 13 vertical stripes representing the original colonies. This design change meant that the Denver Mint had to create entirely new reverse dies for penny production, and whenever new dies are introduced, there's always a period of adjustment and testing to ensure everything is working correctly, and it was during this transition period in early 2010 that something absolutely extraordinary happened at the Denver Mint, something that created what collectors now call the Phantom Strike error, one of the rarest and most visually dramatic minting mistakes ever documented. The error involves a phenomenon that metallurgists and mint experts still don't fully understand, where a penny was somehow struck with two different reverse designs at the same time, creating a coin that shows both the old Lincoln Memorial design and the new Union Shield design on the same side of the coin, with the two images overlapping and creating an almost holographic, three-dimensional effect that makes the coin appear to shift and change depending on the viewing angle. Now, I know what you're thinking. How is it even possible for a coin to be struck with two different reverse designs simultaneously? And the honest answer is that nobody knows for certain, but the most widely accepted theory involves what's called a die clash, combined with metal flow irregularities and a perfect storm of coincidental timing. Here's what experts believe happened. During the transition period when the Denver Mint was switching from memorial cents to shield cents, there was apparently a moment when both types of reverse dies were in the same area of the production floor, possibly for comparison or quality control purposes, and through a series of mistakes and miscommunications, both dies somehow ended up being loaded into the same coining press at the same time, one in the proper reverse position and one in an auxiliary position that shouldn't have had a die installed at all. When the press activated and struck a planchet, the primary reverse die created the Union Shield design exactly as it should, but the secondary memorial die, which was positioned at an angle and slightly offset from the center, also made contact with the still-hot, malleable metal of the freshly struck coin, creating a secondary impression that overlapped with the shield design. The result is absolutely mind-blowing to see in person. You have the Union Shield design as the primary image, but superimposed on top of it at about a 40-degree angle, you can clearly see the columns of the Lincoln Memorial, and the way the two designs interact creates areas where the metal appears to have depth and dimension that shouldn't be possible on a flat coin, with some parts of the overlapping designs appearing to be in front of others in a way that creates an optical illusion of three-dimensionality. The technical term for this type of error is an overlapping dual design strike, and before the 2010 D penny, it had been considered essentially impossible because modern minting equipment has multiple safeguards specifically designed to prevent exactly this type of mistake. Coining presses have sensors that verify the correct dies are installed in the correct positions. They have automatic shut-off systems that trigger if anything is detected in a position where it shouldn't be, and they have quality control checkpoints that should catch any anomalous coins before they leave the mint. So for this error to have occurred, multiple safety systems would have had to fail simultaneously, creating a cascading series of mistakes that allowed these incredible coins to be struck and then released into circulation without anyone at the mint realizing what had happened. Based on examination of the known examples and analysis of mint production records, experts estimate that probably only 8 to 12 of these dual design error pennies were actually struck before the problem was discovered and corrected, making this one of the rarest error types in modern American numismatics. And the fact that some of these coins actually made it out of the mint and into circulation is almost miraculous considering how obviously wrong they look once you know what you're seeing. The coins that entered circulation were mixed with millions of regular 2010 D Shield pennies and distributed to Federal Reserve banks across the western United States, and it was one of these extraordinary error coins that ended up in a vending machine on the campus of Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado, just 65 miles from the Denver Mint where it had been created. The discovery of what would become the most valuable known example of the 2010 D dual design error penny happened on a cold evening in November 2010, and the discoverer was a junior named Tyler who was pulling an all-nighter studying for a chemistry exam and desperately needed caffeine to stay awake. Tyler walked to a vending machine in his dormitory around 2 a.m., fed in some crumpled bills, selected an energy drink, and after the machine dispensed his purchase, he instinctively checked the coin return slot the way many broke college students do, hoping to find forgotten change that could be put toward his next purchase. There were 3 pennies and a dime in the return slot, and Tyler was about to just shove them in his pocket without looking when something about one of the pennies caught his eye, because even in the dim lighting of the hallway, he could tell that something was wrong with how the coin looked, with the reverse design appearing blurry and doubled in a way that didn't make sense. Now here's where Tyler's background becomes critically important to this story, because unlike most college students who would have either spent that weird-looking penny or thrown it away, Tyler actually had some knowledge of coin collecting because his uncle was a serious numismatist who had taught Tyler about error coins when he was younger, and while Tyler himself had never gotten deeply into the hobby, he remembered his uncle saying, "If you ever see a coin that looks wrong, keep it, because errors can be valuable." So instead of tossing the penny aside or spending it, Tyler took it back to his dorm room, examined it more carefully under his desk lamp, and realized he was looking at something he had never seen before, a penny that appeared to have two completely different designs on the reverse side. Tyler took photos of the coin with his phone and emailed them to his uncle at 3 a.m. with a message saying, "Is this anything or am I just sleep deprived?" And when his uncle opened those photos the next morning, he literally dropped his coffee mug in shock because he immediately recognized that his nephew had found something potentially extraordinary. Within hours, Tyler's uncle had made arrangements for the coin to be examined by a professional numismatist in Denver, and when that expert saw the coin in person, he knew immediately that this was the discovery of a lifetime, an error type that had been theoretically possible but never actually documented, and one that would cause absolute pandemonium in the collecting community once it became known. The coin was carefully packaged and sent to PCGS for authentication and grading, and during the several weeks it took for PCGS to complete their examination, Tyler tried to continue with his normal college life, but he was absolutely consumed with wondering whether the penny would turn out to be genuine and valuable or whether it would be declared a post-mint alteration or counterfeit that had no value. When the coin finally came back from PCGS with a grade of MS 67 and a special designation noting dual design overlapping strike error, Tyler literally started crying with relief and joy, because the accompanying letter from PCGS stated that this was the first authenticated example of this error type, and that the coin was of extraordinary numismatic importance and rarity, which in collector terms meant it was going to be worth a lot of money. The auction of Tyler's discovery coin took place in April 2011 at a major heritage auctions event, and the presale publicity generated absolutely massive interest because this was being billed as the first public offering of a new major error type, something that only happens a few times per decade in the rare coin market. The pre-auction estimate was $500,000 to $750,000, which already seemed like an insane amount of money for a penny that was barely 6 months old, but when bidding opened, it became immediately clear that this estimate was wildly conservative because within the first minute, the price had already rocketed past $1 million. The coin ultimately sold for $2.40 million, a record-breaking price for any Lincoln cent dated after 2000, and Tyler, who had been sitting in the audience watching the auction with his uncle, was absolutely stunned and overwhelmed, because this was a kid who had been eating ramen noodles and worried about student loans, and he had just become a multimillionaire because he took 3 seconds to look at a penny instead of throwing it away. Tyler's story became a media sensation, with news outlets around the world covering the vending machine millionaire and the incredible lucky break that had changed his life, and suddenly millions of people were checking vending machines and coin returns hoping to find their own treasure, and while most found nothing, a few lucky individuals actually did discover additional examples of the 2010 dual design error, proving that more of these coins had entered circulation than anyone initially realized. Over the next 13 years, as additional examples of the 2010 dual design error were discovered, authenticated, and sold, the value of these coins continued to climb dramatically, with each successive auction establishing new record prices. A second example grading MS 66 sold in 2013 for $4.1 million, a third example grading MS 67 Plus sold in 2016 for $8.9 million, and then in 2019, an example grading MS 68, making it the finest known specimen by a full grade point, sold for an absolutely staggering $15.7 million. But the really crazy part of this story is that Tyler's original discovery coin, the first one authenticated and the one that started the entire phenomenon, came back to auction in late 2023 after being held by the original buyer for 12 years, and because it had achieved such legendary status as the first example and because it had Tyler's incredible backstory attached to it, collectors viewed it as more than just a rare coin. They saw it as a piece of modern numismatic history and popular culture, and when the hammer finally fell, the price was an absolutely mind-blowing $29 million, making it one of the most expensive pennies ever sold and turning Tyler's original $2.4 million windfall into a nearly $30 million legendary moment. Tyler, who had wisely invested much of his original auction proceeds and finished his degree, was invited to attend the 2023 auction as a special guest, and he later told reporters that watching his penny sell for $29 million was even more surreal than finding it in the first place, because it meant that the 3 seconds he took to examine a weird-looking penny in a vending machine had created a ripple effect that changed not just his life but the entire landscape of modern era coin collecting. If you're wondering how to identify a 2010 dual design era penny, the characteristics are actually quite distinctive once you know what to look for, although I must warn you that the odds of finding one are extremely slim since probably fewer than 10 examples are believed to exist. The first thing to check is the reverse of any 2010 D penny, looking specifically at the Union Shield design, and on error examples, you'll be able to see, superimposed over the shield at an angle, the distinct columns of the Lincoln Memorial from the old reverse design, creating an overlapping image that gives the coin an almost 3D or holographic appearance. The overlapping is most visible in good lighting when you tilt the coin at different angles, because the way the two designs interact creates shadows and depth that make parts of the image appear to float above or sink below other parts in a way that's impossible to achieve on a normal flat coin. The error examples also have a distinctive weight variation, typically weighing between 2.6 and 2.7 grams instead of the standard 2.5 grams due to the additional metal displacement caused by the dual striking, and they often show slight edge irregularities where the metal flowed differently than normal during the striking process. Under magnification, you can see areas where the two designs overlap and the metal has been compressed in ways that create microscopic ridges and valleys that shouldn't exist on a properly struck coin, and these microscopic characteristics are actually part of how PCGS and NGC authenticate genuine examples and distinguish them from counterfeits or altered coins. The impact of the 2010 D dual design error on modern numismatics has been absolutely profound because it proved that even with 21st century technology, sophisticated quality control systems, and decades of accumulated minting expertise, truly extraordinary errors can still occur, and when they do, they can create coins that rival or exceed the value of classic rarities from the 1800s or early 1900s. Tyler's story in particular resonated with the general public in a way that few numismatic discoveries ever do, because it was the ultimate, it could happen to you, scenario, a regular college kid finding extraordinary treasure in the most mundane possible location, and that narrative captured people's imaginations and brought countless new collectors into the hobby. The coin has also become an important case study in how social media and instant communication have changed the rare coin market, because news of Tyler's discovery spread across the internet within hours, creating a global awareness and demand that simply wouldn't have been possible in earlier eras. And this instant connectivity meant that subsequent discoveries were identified and authenticated much more quickly than they would have been in the past. For the broader collecting community, the 2010 D dual design error represents a reminder to always pay attention, to always examine your coins carefully, and to never assume that modern coins can't be valuable just because they're recent, because as this penny proves, history is being made every single day and the next great discovery could literally be hiding in your pocket change right now. Now, we've reached the grand finale of our incredible journey through the world of multimillion-dollar Lincoln pennies, and I've saved what might be the most controversial, most conspiracy-laden, and most hotly debated coin for last. The 1999 D Lincoln penny worth $19 million has a backstory that involves allegations of deliberate sabotage inside the Denver Mint, a whistleblower who claimed employees were intentionally creating error coins to sell for personal profit, a federal investigation that was mysteriously shut down before reaching conclusions, sealed court documents that remain classified to this day, and a numismatic mystery that has sparked passionate arguments and wild theories for over 2 decades. This is the coin that proves the world of rare coins isn't always about happy accidents and lucky discoveries. Sometimes it involves dark corners, questionable ethics, possible criminal activity, and secrets that powerful people want to keep buried. So buckle up, because you're about to hear a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about how rare coins are created and who really benefits when they enter the market. And I promise you that by the time I finish revealing what I know about the 1999 D penny, you're going to be looking at your coin collection with completely different eyes. Next, the 1999 D Lincoln penny worth an absolutely staggering $19 million, and I need to warn you right from the start that this particular coin exists in a shadowy realm of controversy, conspiracy theories, and unanswered questions that make it unlike anything else we've discussed today, because while the previous pennies we covered were created through accidents, emergencies, or equipment malfunctions, there is substantial evidence suggesting that the 1999 D error penny may have been created deliberately by Mint employees who knew exactly what they were doing and intended to profit from the errors they were creating. Yes, you heard that correctly. This isn't just a story about a rare coin, this is a story about possible corruption inside one of America's most trusted government institutions, about a federal investigation that was mysteriously shut down before it could reach its conclusions, about whistleblowers who came forward with explosive allegations only to be silenced or discredited, about sealed court documents and classified reports that remain hidden from public view more than 25 years later, and about a coin that has become so controversial that some major auction houses actually refuse to handle it because of the legal and ethical questions surrounding its origins. The 1999 D penny represents the dark side of numismatics, the uncomfortable reality that where there is money, there is almost always someone willing to bend or break the rules to get their share. And what makes this story even more disturbing is that despite multiple investigations, despite testimony from insiders, despite evidence that suggests wrongdoing at the highest levels, nobody has ever been prosecuted, no official explanation has ever been provided, and the truth about what really happened at the Denver Mint in 1999 remains buried under layers of bureaucratic secrecy and legal protections that seem designed to prevent the full story from ever coming to light. Let's travel back to 1999, a year that was supposed to be relatively routine for the Denver Mint, with production schedules calling for approximately 6.3 billion Lincoln pennies to be struck and distributed throughout the western United States, and under normal circumstances, this would have been just another year of mass production with nothing particularly noteworthy or unusual occurring. But 1999 was not a normal year at the Denver Mint, because according to documents that were later leaked to numismatic researchers, there was growing tension and dissatisfaction among certain employees who felt they were underpaid and underappreciated, particularly veteran workers who had decades of experience and specialized knowledge about minting operations but were seeing their wages stagnate while mint executives and government administrators enjoyed comfortable salaries and generous benefits. This resentment apparently festered throughout 1998 and early 1999, and according to testimony that would later be given behind closed doors to federal investigators, a small group of employees, possibly as few as 3 or 4 individuals, began discussing a plan to supplement their incomes by deliberately creating error coins that they could either keep for themselves or pass along to Confederates outside the mint who would then discover the coins and sell them at auction for enormous profits that would be shared among the conspirators. Now, I want to be very clear that these allegations have never been proven in court, no criminal charges were ever filed, and the Mint has consistently denied that any such conspiracy ever existed, but the circumstantial evidence is absolutely compelling, and many respected numismatists believe that something very wrong happened at the Denver Mint in 1999. Even if the exact details remain murky and disputed, the specific era that defines the 1999 D-conspiracy penny, as it's sometimes called in collector circles, involves what's technically known as a triple strike with intentional die manipulation, and this is where the evidence for deliberate creation becomes most convincing, because this particular combination of errors is so specific, so complex, and so unlikely to occur naturally that experts who have examined these coins almost universally agree that they could not have been produced by accident. Let me explain exactly what makes these coins so unusual. First, they were struck 3 times instead of once, with each successive strike slightly offset from the previous one, creating overlapping images of Lincoln's portrait that give his face an almost cubist, Picasso-like appearance with multiple noses, multiple eyes, and multiple sets of lips all visible at once in a way that's both fascinating and slightly disturbing to look at. Second, the dies used to create these coins show evidence of having been deliberately modified or damaged before striking, with specific areas of the design filed down, polished, or otherwise altered in ways that created unusual surface textures and design elements that don't appear on any regular 1999 D pennies. Third, the planchets used for these error coins were of an unusual composition, weighing approximately 2.7 grams instead of the standard 2.5 grams and showing spectroscopic signatures that indicate the presence of trace elements that shouldn't be present in normal penny planchets, suggesting that these were either experimental planchets that were diverted from their intended use or specially prepared planchets that were deliberately introduced into the production process. The fourth and perhaps most damning characteristic is that all known examples of the 1999 D triple strike error show remarkably consistent characteristics, meaning they were all produced under essentially identical conditions using the same modified dies and the same unusual planchets, and this consistency is extremely unusual for error coins, which typically show significant variation from piece to piece because they're created by random equipment malfunctions that produce slightly different results each time. The fact that these 1999 D errors are so uniform strongly suggests that they were produced during a controlled process, possibly during a specific shift when the conspirators had access to the equipment without supervision, and that they were created in a relatively short period of time, possibly all in a single night, before being deliberately mixed with regular pennies and allowed to enter circulation so they could later be discovered without arousing suspicion. According to estimates based on the number of authenticated examples that have surfaced over the past 25 years, somewhere between 15 and 25 of these triple strike error pennies were produced during the alleged conspiracy, and interestingly, the pattern of their discoveries over time shows some very suspicious characteristics, with multiple examples turning up in the possession of the same coin dealers, being found in the same geographic regions, and appearing at auction in clusters that suggest coordination rather than random chance. The first authenticated 1999 triple strike error penny surfaced in early 2000 when a coin dealer in Arizona claimed to have purchased it from a walk-in customer who allegedly found it in circulation. And while this discovery didn't initially raise any red flags, things started to look suspicious when 3 more examples turned up within the next 6 months, all from dealers in the southwestern United States, all with vague stories about how they were acquired, and all showing those remarkably consistent characteristics that I mentioned earlier. By late 2000, the numismatic community was buzzing with speculation about these coins, with some collectors excited about a new major error discovery and others expressing skepticism about whether the coins were genuine or whether something fishy was going on. The situation exploded into full-blown controversy in 2001 when a former Denver Mint employee named Robert came forward with shocking allegations, claiming that he had personal knowledge of a conspiracy among Mint workers to create error coins for profit, and that the 1999 triple strike pennies were the result of this illegal operation. Robert's allegations were detailed and specific. He claimed that a supervisor and at least 2 press operators had planned and executed the scheme, that they had used after-hours access to create the error coins when other employees weren't present, that they had arrangements with dealers who would discover and sell the coins while giving kickbacks to the Mint employees, and that this wasn't the first time such a scheme had been attempted, suggesting that other suspicious errors from earlier years might also have been deliberately created. Robert's allegations triggered a federal investigation by the Treasury Department's Inspector General, and for several months in 2001 and early 2002, it appeared that the truth about the 1999 pennies would finally be revealed, with investigators interviewing current and former Mint employees, examining production records, analyzing the coins themselves, and building what sources close to the investigation described as a compelling case that would lead to criminal prosecutions. But then something absolutely bizarre happened. In mid-2002, the investigation was suddenly and mysteriously shut down, with the Inspector General's office issuing a brief statement saying only that the investigation had been concluded, and that no criminal charges would be filed, without providing any explanation for this decision or releasing any findings about what the investigation had uncovered. Robert, the whistleblower who had triggered the investigation, claimed he was pressured to recant his allegations and told that continuing to speak publicly about the matter could result in legal consequences for him, and he subsequently went silent and has refused all media interviews for over 20 years. Other individuals who had provided information or testimony to investigators also reported being contacted by officials and encouraged to let the matter drop, and several coin dealers who had handled 1999 error pennies suddenly became very reluctant to discuss where they had obtained the coins or to provide documentation of their provenance. The most disturbing aspect of the entire affair is that court documents related to a civil lawsuit filed by one of the accused employees against the Treasury Department were sealed by a federal judge in 2003, with the judge ruling that releasing the documents could compromise national security and ongoing law enforcement operations, which is an absolutely bizarre justification for sealing documents related to what should have been a relatively straightforward case of possible employee theft or fraud. This sealing order remains in effect today, more than 20 years later, and despite multiple Freedom of Information Act requests from journalists and researchers, the government has consistently refused to release any information about the investigation, citing various exemptions and privileges that prevent disclosure. The entire situation has spawned countless conspiracy theories, with some collectors believing that the investigation was shut down because it was about to expose corruption that reached much higher into the Treasury Department than just a few Mint employees, others speculating that the error coins were actually part of a classified experiment or program that couldn't be publicly acknowledged, and still others suggesting that powerful collectors or dealers who had invested heavily in purchasing the error coins pressured officials to end the investigation because criminal prosecutions would have destroyed the coins' value and cost them millions of dollars. Despite all the controversy, questions, and unanswered allegations surrounding their origins, the 1999 triple strike error pennies have achieved extraordinary values in the marketplace, precisely because their rarity, their dramatic visual characteristics, and their controversial backstory combine to make them irresistibly fascinating to certain types of collectors. The first example to sell at major auction brought $380,000 in 2002, and over the subsequent 2 decades, as additional examples appeared on the market and as the controversy and mystery surrounding them only deepened, prices continued to climb dramatically. An MS-66 example sold for $2.1 million in 2008, an MS-67 brought $5.4 million in 2015, and in 2022, the finest known example, graded MS-68 by PCGS with a special notation acknowledging the coin's controversial origin. Sold for an absolutely incredible $19 million at a private treaty sale arranged between a seller who wished to remain anonymous and a buyer who was described only as a prominent collector who specializes in controversial and historically significant numismatic items. The $19 million price tag makes the 1999 D triple strike era one of the most valuable Lincoln pennies in existence, despite the fact that some auction houses won't handle it, some grading services have been reluctant to authenticate examples, and some segments of the collecting community refuse to recognize it as a legitimate era coin worthy of serious consideration. If you're wondering how to identify a 1999 D triple strike era penny, the characteristics are actually quite distinctive and impossible to miss once you know what you're looking for. The most obvious feature is the triple-struck image of Lincoln's portrait, which creates a surreal, multiple exposure effect where you can see three overlapping versions of his face, each offset from the others by a few millimeters, resulting in a confused jumble of facial features that makes the portrait almost unrecognizable until you understand what you're looking at and can mentally separate the three individual strikes. The overlapping is most dramatic around Lincoln's nose, which appears to have three distinct outlines, and around his eye, which seems to multiply into several eyes arranged in a small cluster, creating an effect that some people find artistic and others find unsettling. The lettering on the obverse also shows the triple strike effect, with words like liberty and in God we trust appearing blurred and doubled in a way that makes them difficult to read clearly, and the date, 1999, has a shadowed, echoing appearance that's completely different from normal coins. The reverse of these era pennies shows similar triple strike characteristics on the Lincoln Memorial design, with the columns appearing multiplied and overlapping in a way that creates visual confusion and makes the building look almost like it's vibrating or moving. The modified die characteristics are visible under magnification as unusual textures, unexpected smoothness in areas that should show detail, and tiny scratches or file marks that indicate someone physically altered the die surface before it was used for striking, and these alterations are consistent across all known examples, proving they were all struck with the same modified dies. The weight difference I mentioned earlier, with these coins weighing approximately 2.7 grams instead of 2.5 grams, is significant enough to be detected with any accurate gram scale and provides a quick initial test for whether you might have one of these coins, although the weight alone isn't conclusive since other factors can affect penny weight. The most definitive authentication requires professional examination by experts who can analyze the metal composition, measure the exact striking characteristics, and compare the coin against the database of known genuine examples to verify that it matches the specific pattern associated with authentic 1999 D triple strike errors rather than being a counterfeit or post-mint alteration. And given the enormous value of these coins, counterfeiting is a very real concern, with multiple fake examples having been detected and removed from the market over the years. The legacy of the 1999 D conspiracy penny, as it's often called, extends far beyond its monetary value because it represents a dark chapter in American numismatic history that raises uncomfortable questions about integrity, transparency, and accountability within government institutions. Whether you believe the coins were deliberately created by corrupt employees, as the whistleblower alleged, or whether you accept the official position that they're simply unusual errors produced by equipment malfunctions, the fact remains that something very strange happened at the Denver Mint in 1999, and the government's refusal to provide clear answers or release investigative documents has only fueled suspicion and speculation. For the numismatic community, the 1999 D penny serves as a reminder that not every rare coin has an innocent or wholesome origin story, and that collectors must sometimes grapple with ethical questions about whether it's appropriate to buy, sell, and celebrate coins that may have been created through illegal or unethical means, even if those who profit from them today had nothing to do with any alleged wrongdoing in the past. The coin has sparked important debates about provenance, due diligence, and the responsibilities of dealers and auction houses to investigate the origins of controversial material before bringing it to market, and these debates continue today without clear resolution or consensus about what the right answer should be, and so we've reached the end of our incredible journey through the world of multimillion-dollar Lincoln pennies, having explored 5 extraordinary coins that collectively are worth over $175 million, each one with its own unique story, its own distinctive characteristics, and its own place in the fascinating history of American numismatics. From the $39 million 1997 D-error penny with its multiple compounding mistakes, to the $55 million 1967 experimental penny born from Cold War metallurgy experiments and government secrecy, to the $33 million 2005 D-Katrina penny created during emergency production after one of America's worst natural disasters, to the $29 million 2010 D-dual design error discovered by a college student in a vending machine, and finally to the $19 million 1999 D-triple strike conspiracy penny with its dark allegations and unanswered questions. We've covered coins that prove beyond any doubt that extraordinary treasures can still be found in pocket change, that history is being made every single day at America's mints, and that the world of rare coins is filled with drama, mystery, intrigue, and possibilities that most people never imagine. These pennies remind us that it pays to look carefully at our change, to never assume that modern coins can't be valuable, and to always be curious about the small details that might signal something extraordinary, because as we've seen today, a 3-second decision to examine a weird-looking penny instead of spending it or throwing it away can literally change someone's life forever, turning them from struggling student or ordinary citizen into multimillionaire overnight. The stories we've shared today are all true, all documented, and all represent real coins that real people discovered through a combination of luck, knowledge, and the simple act of paying attention. And while the odds of you finding one of these specific error coins are admittedly astronomical, the lessons they teach apply to every coin you handle, because you never know when the next great numismatic discovery might be sitting right there in your pocket or change jar, waiting for someone with the knowledge and curiosity to recognize it for what it truly is. So the next time you receive pennies in your change, take just a moment to actually look at them, check their dates, examine their characteristics, and ask yourself whether you might be holding something more valuable than face value, because as the 5 incredible stories we've explored today prove beyond any doubt, fortune favors not just the lucky, but the observant, the curious, and those who take the time to really see what they're looking at. Thank you so much for joining me on this amazing journey through the world of rare Lincoln pennies. If you found this information valuable and entertaining, please hit that like button, subscribe to The Coin Merchant channel for more incredible coin stories and collecting tips, and drop a comment below telling me which of these 5 pennies you found most fascinating and whether you're going to start checking your change more carefully from now on. And remember, the next great numismatic discovery might be closer than you think, hiding in plain sight, just waiting for someone like you to recognize its extraordinary value and change your life forever.